The sun rose over the jagged peaks of the eastern range, casting long, thin shadows across the valley where the first family had made their home. The air was crisp, with the scent of pine and the dampness of the morning dew, a world far removed from the eternal spring of the High King's garden. Here, life was measured in the rhythm of the seasons and the strength of one's back. Adam, the patriarch, had taught his sons the art of the earth and the lore of the flock. He spoke often of the tithe, the sacred portion that must be returned to the High King as a sign of fealty and remembrance. As the years passed, the brothers grew into their roles with a diligence that defined their very souls. Cain, the firstborn, claimed the rich bottomlands near the river, where the soil was dark and heavy. He became a master of the plow and the scythe, a man whose life was dictated by the turning of the furrow and the timing of the rain. Abel, the younger, preferred the high plateaus and the rolling hills, where the grass grew thick and the air was thin. He was a keeper of the sheep, a guardian of the vulnerable, finding a quiet purpose in the cycles of birth and the protection of his charges from the wolves that prowled the periphery of their world. In process of time, the season of the great tithe arrived. It was a day of solemn assembly, a time when the first family gathered at the ancient stone altar they had raised in the shadow of a great oak. Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. He prepared a grand display of his labor: sheaves of golden wheat, baskets of deep red apples, and heavy clusters of purple grapes, all harvested with great effort from his well-tended fields. He viewed his offering as a testament to his own prowess, a tribute from a vassal who had conquered the stubborn earth. Yet, as he laid the produce upon the stone, his heart remained focused on the pride of his hands rather than the majesty of the king. Abel, in contrast, brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. He chose the very best of his lambs, the unblemished and the pure, acknowledging that life itself belonged to the Creator. He offered the sacrifice with a spirit of humility, understanding that the bloodshed was a shadow of a greater mystery, a recognition of the cost of the fall. The High King, whose eyes see through the thickest stone and the darkest heart, had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. A divine light, soft yet undeniable, descended upon Abel's altar, a sign of royal acceptance that warmed the very air. But over Cain's offering, the sky remained gray, and the smoke of his fire clung to the ground, refusing to rise. Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. A bitter frost seemed to settle in his chest, a jealousy that burned colder than any winter wind. He looked upon his brother's success not with joy, but with a growing resentment that poisoned his thoughts. The High King, in his mercy, spoke to Cain in the stillness of the evening. "Why art thou wroth?" he asked, his voice like the low roll of distant thunder. "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him." It was a warning, a royal command to master the dark impulses that were even then taking root in Cain's soul. Yet Cain allowed the seeds of envy to sprout into the weeds of malice. The tension grew in the days that followed. Cain walked his fields with a heavy tread, his eyes fixed on the distant hills where Abel's flocks grazed in peace. He felt the weight of his perceived injustice like a suit of heavy iron armor. One afternoon, when the sun was low and the shadows were long, Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. The silence that followed was absolute, a void in the world that could never be filled. The earth, which had once yielded fruit for the brothers, now drank the blood of the innocent. Cain stood over the body, the reality of his deed crashing down upon him like a falling tower. He sought to hide the evidence, to bury the shame beneath the very soil he had once loved. But the High King's reach is infinite, and his justice is swift. "Where is Abel thy brother?" The king's voice echoed across the silent field. Cain, his heart hardened by his crime, replied with a sneer that masked his terror. "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" The king's response was a clarion call of judgment. "What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. Cain felt the connection to his lands wither and die. The soil turned to dust beneath his feet, and the trees seemed to pull their branches away from his touch. My punishment is greater than I can bear, he cried, fearing that every man who found him would seek to avenge the blood he had spilled. But the king, in a final act of terrible sovereignty, set a mark upon Cain, a sign of protection and of shame, lest any finding him should kill him. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. He walked a lonely path, a banished lord without a kingdom. He wandered through desolate valleys and over scorched plains, the memory of his brother's face, a ghost that followed in his wake. Yet, even in his exile, the spirit of man remained resilient and restless. Cain took a wife from among his kin, and she conceived and bare Enoch. In the harsh landscape of Nod, Cain did not seek to return to the humble life of a tiller, for the earth would no longer answer his call. Instead, he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. This was not a city of wood and thatch, but a fortress of stone and iron, a monument to human defiance against the wilderness. Within its walls, the descendants of Cain began to forge a new kind of existence, one defined by artifice and industry rather than the natural order of the king's design. The line of Cain flourished in the ways of the world. There arose Jabal, the father of such as dwell in tents and of such as have cattle, masters of the nomadic life on the fringes of the civilized lands. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all, such as handle the harp and organ, crafting instruments of silver and fine wood that could stir the soul or mask the sound of weeping. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. The furnaces of Enoch roared day and night, smithing weapons of war and tools of construction, turning the raw elements of the earth into symbols of power. Yet, with this progress came a deepening of the darkness. Lamech, a descendant of Cain, took unto him 2 wives, Ada and Zillah, breaking the ancient pattern of the garden. He boasted of his violence, claiming a vengeance 70 and 7-fold, a testament to how far the heart of man had drifted from the mercy of the High King. The city of Enoch became a place of towers and treasures, but also of secrets and strife, a gilded cage built by a fugitive. Meanwhile, a new hope was born to Adam and Eve in their aging years. Eve bare a son and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Seth was a man of a different spirit, one who looked toward the lost light of Eden with a longing that his brother Cain had never known. To Seth also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. While the city of Enoch rang with the sound of hammers and the music of lutes, the lineage of Seth gathered in the quiet places to offer prayers and songs of praise. They lived as stewards of the memory of the king, keeping the ancient stories alive, and teaching their children the path of righteousness. The world was now divided between the city and the sanctuary, between the power of iron and the power of the spirit. The generations of Seth were long-lived, their years spanning centuries like the great oaks of the forest. There was Jared and Enoch, a man who walked so closely with the High King that he was not, for the king took him, whisking him away to the celestial courts without the sting of death. There was Methuselah, whose years were the most numerous of all mortal men, a living bridge across the vast stretches of time. But as the centuries turned, the shadow of the fall continued to lengthen. The beauty of the world remained, but it was increasingly obscured by the ambitions of men. The daughters of the line of Seth were fair, and the sons of the line of Cain were strong, and the boundaries between the 2 lineages began to blur. The simplicity of the early days was replaced by a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and a growing forgetfulness of the High King's laws. Adam, the first of men, eventually laid down his burdens and returned to the dust from whence he came, his long vigil over. Eve followed him into the silence, leaving their children to navigate the world they had helped to shape. The landscape was now dotted with settlements, and the smoke of many hearths rose into the evening sky. Yet, the air felt heavy, as if a great storm were brewing just beyond the horizon. The wickedness of man was beginning to grow great in the earth, and the thoughts of his heart were becoming only evil continually. The High King looked down from his high throne, his heart grieved by the corruption of his creation. The story of man, which had begun in the brilliance of a garden, was now drifting toward a dark and watery horizon. The stage was set for a reckoning that would wash the world clean, a transformation as profound as the creation itself. The memory of Abel's sacrifice and the mark on Cain's brow remained as twin witnesses to the duality of the human soul, the capacity for profound devotion and the potential for devastating destruction, all unfolding under the watchful, grieving eyes of the sovereign of all realms.